Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and looking at verses 12 through 15. We'll continue there and then look at verses 16 through 22. Verse 12, I know that there is no good in them, talking about creation, temporal things, but for a man to rejoice and do good in his life, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. I know that whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor any taken from it. And God doeth it, that men should fear before him. That which hath been is now, that which is to be hath already been, and God requireth that which is past. You saw last week that life, physical life, is a gift. It is a gift from God. And though we cannot comprehend God's works, we are to rejoice in them, and we are to do good. So what Solomon is saying is, again, life is a gift. Trust God. Enjoy life. But the key is to do so focused upon the Lord. To enjoy life separate from the Lord is worldliness. But we are to enjoy life. We shouldn't be miserable. We should enjoy life as a gift from God. But again, we should do so focused upon God. Nothing coming before Him. Our enjoyment of life cannot come before God. And in that realm, he speaks of God's unchanging sovereignty. In other words, live in the awareness of God's sovereignty. Now, lost man, of course, is not going to do that. But you and I are to live in the awareness of God's sovereignty. And if we do that, we do not get carried away with the disappointments of life, with the things that are wrong with life. They don't master us because we realize it all falls under the sovereignty of God. And that's what he's speaking of when he says, I know that whatsoever God doeth shall be forever. He's talking about God's plan, God's purposes. Nothing can be put to it. It's perfect, whether we understand it or not. It's perfect. Nor anything taken from it. There are things in life we might think, well, I wish there was more of that. And I wish there was less of this. But what God does, what God allows, is perfect. That is, it's in His perfect plan. So Solomon's conclusion is, trust God. And enjoy life. Trust God. Leave everything with Him. So what he's saying here is the purpose of God is immutable. It needs no addition or subtraction. It cannot be altered. What God has purposed, you cannot change. It cannot be altered. It cannot be set aside by the will or the power of man. I know that whatsoever God doeth shall be forever. That is, He doesn't change His plans, His purposes. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it. It's the realization of that truth. God is in control. We say that all the time. Well, God's in control. Yes. But many times when people say that, they don't really mean it. They don't believe it. That's proven by their actions. But it's the realization of this truth that will cause us to accept the seasons of life that we went through there in the first 8 verses. Seasons change. God's in control of every season. There are seasons we like better than others, no question about that. There are seasons that we ourselves would not choose. But God's in control of the seasons. So trust Him. Trust Him. And this is where the child of God finds stability. God's in control. In the midst of whatever appears chaotic, this is where we find stability. He is the God of all seasons. That truth must take hold of us. And when it does, we will cease trying to be the architect of our life and everyone else's. And we just trust the designer of all things. The result of that is we find peace. God's design and sovereignty are absolute. They're eternal. They're immutable. Trust God. The reason for this, verse 14, that men should fear before Him. God's in control of all things. Trust that men should fear before Him. The fear here is not terror, but it's awe. Humble respect and submission. God's in control of all things. We don't understand probably most of the things that happen. But we are to just have a humble respect and submission to the Lord. So as we see God as the designer and the controller of life, that results in an awe of Him and a humility of heart and life, which will result in a life of worship. He goes on in verse 15 and he tells us God is in control of the continuous cycle of human history. You can just take the history of the United States. Most people, back in the day when they were taught United States history, or world history for that matter, all you did was memorize a bunch of dates. And most kids found that quite boring. And basically it is. But God's people ought to view history in a different light. View history, see God's hand in history. Again, it could be world history, the history of any country, but see God's hand in it. It takes on an entirely different meaning. We are to live in the awareness that God is in control, always has been, of the continuous cycle. And that's what history is. It's a cycle. That's why we hear that saying, and it's a very, very true saying. There's one thing we don't learn from history, and that is we don't learn from history. That's true. We just keep doing the same things over and over and act as if it was the first time it's ever happened. Live in the awareness of God's hand. There are no surprises to God in time. There are no surprises to God in the events of time. God is outside of time. We don't understand that because everything we do is in the realm of time. But if you could just draw two circles, one time, one God. God's outside of time. We're in the circle of time. God's outside of time, but He's in control of time. He's in control of the events of time. And He brings all actions in His time to accountability. We must believe that. A lot of things we don't understand. A lot of things we don't understand why God allows it. But we're not to question God. We know that He, in His time, there's a time of accountability. Trust God. Leave it with Him. So verse 14 is a statement that human history operates in continuous, repetitive cycles, and God is over it all. What is stated here is that past, present, and future, they're all bound together by His design. And God ensures that every action, every event is accountable to Him. Maybe not right this second, but it's all working toward that time. Most who profess salvation, though they do not verbalize it directly, the theological positions they take declare it. Declare that they basically believe God created the world, designed and fixed certain laws by which the world operates, and then He just left it to Himself. Left it to itself. And if you asked a child of God, do you believe that? They'd say, well, no. But then they deny the sovereignty of God. Well, that's what you're saying in your denial of the sovereignty of God. God created, but then He just left it to operate on its own. And that's what most believe in reality. Their theological position states that. When we let the things of life, the events of life, absolutely control us, that's what we believe. God just left it. We've got to do something. Trust God. The truth is, all things work according to God's sovereign plan. You and I don't have to understand it. We have to believe it. Romans chapter 11, very familiar verse. Verse 36. For of Him, and through Him, and to Him are all things. Do we believe that? That's the teaching of Scripture. Again, we don't have to understand it. And it's all for His glory, as he goes on to say. So God's in control. God directs human history. The overall lesson is surrender all to Him. Trust Him. Don't live life apart from God. Don't view life apart from God. See God in it all. And trust Him. It further establishes the overall conclusion of the book. Fear God. Keep His commandments. Well, I don't understand why God allows such and such. Fear God, keep His commandments. That's all we're to do. So then in verses 16 through 22, he begins to view God's sovereignty and earthly injustices and mortality. There in verses 16 through 22. To save time, we'll not read those verses. But Solomon is still showing us that life apart from God is vanity. It's empty. Live in the awareness that God is working His plan. He mentions in verse 16 and 17 the injustices of life. He says, moreover, I saw under the sun the place of judgment. That is, the places where judgment is administered. The places where judgment should be carried out. He says, I looked at these places, that wickedness was there. In these places, where one would expect to find fairness and honesty, instead there was perversion. Much like today. It's been that way throughout history. This isn't anything new. Political corruption is nothing new. It's been going on since the fall. It's been going on since human government. It is what's common in a fallen world. It's a common thing. God warned against it. Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 19. Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 17. God warned against it. Against injustice being in places where justice should be carried out. What are we to do? Well, we take matters in our own hands. Well, that's not what God's Word says. Trust God. He's in control. Well, it don't make sense. No, it doesn't. A lot of times. That doesn't make sense to us. But to God, everything's working toward a goal, toward an end. Notice in Psalm 82, verse 2. How long will you judge unjustly and accept the persons of the wicked? You condemn the just and you accept the wicked. That's way back in Psalm 82. This is nothing new. The repetitive cycles of human history. Well, it's not right. No, it isn't. But it's according to God's plan. Well, it doesn't make sense. Perhaps not to us. Trust God. Proverbs 24, verse 23. These things also belong to the wise. It is not good to have respect of persons in judgment. You see it all the time. See it all the time. Well, they think they're above the law. Yes, they do. That's not right. No, it's not. But who's in control? God is. Proverbs 29, verse 27. An unjust man is an abomination to the just, and he that is upright in the way is abomination to the wicked. It's been that way since the fall. We take comfort in knowing God's in control. Trust Him. Proverbs 31:4, it is not for kings, O Lemuel, it's not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes strong drink. Verse 5, lest they drink and forget the law and pervert the judgment of any of the afflicted. So what is said in these verses really is what is illustrated in Isaiah 59, verse 14. I preached a series on this verse long time ago. To be honest with you, I forgot the verse was even there. I've forgotten about it. And someone reminded me this week that back in the 80s they remembered a message that I preached on this verse. So I to be honest, I had to go look at the verse. But verse 14, and judgment is turned away backward, and justice standeth afar off. For, here's the reason. Truth is fallen in the street, and equity cannot enter. I was told I preached a message entitled A Traffic Jam. And that's basically what we have here. Is truth is fallen in the street. So just picture something is fallen in the street. It's blocking the road. The result is some cars turn around. They can't get through. Judgment is turned away backward. Justice standeth afar off, and equity cannot enter. That pretty much describes what is happening. Truth is falling in the street, conveying the idea that it's being rejected or neglected. The road is blocked. Traffic is blocked. Why? Truth is fallen in the street. That's the reason. The road is blocked. And there's a threefold result. Judgment. That's discernment. The ability to make a distinction between true and false, right and wrong, good and bad. Multitudes cannot see the difference between truth and error. Truth is fallen in the street. That is, they don't. Truth is not their standard. So they can't base their decisions on truth. Justice, righteousness, standeth afar off. Equity, fairness, cannot enter. That's not fair. That's not fair. Maybe so. But why is that so common, unfairness? Because truth. has been rejected. It all goes back to that. And in the context there of Isaiah 59, verse 7, you see that thinking is corrupt. Why is thinking corrupt? Because truth is rejected. Paths are filled with waste and destruction. Why? Because truth is rejected. Verse 8, they have no peace. And there is despair in verse 9. There's blindness in verse 10. And utter frustration in verse 11. We see it all around us. The reason, truth is abandoned. But God's in control. It's part of God's plan. So trust God. He then goes on and he speaks of wickedness in verse 16 and in Ecclesiastes 3. And the places of righteousness, that iniquity was there. So he observes that in the places of where you would expect to see righteousness, it was not. It wasn't there. Life abounds with injustice. Life abounds with wickedness. And apart from God, if you view it apart from God, take God out of the picture, it creates a great amount of frustration. But you and I must not take God out of the picture. The common question is, if God's in control, why is there so much evil in the world? That's a common question. All we can say is God's in control. Do we believe that? Trust Him. Enjoy the life God has given you. Trust Him. Do good. Fear God. Keep His commandments. Then he moves on in verses 18 through 21. And he speaks of man's mortality. People struggle with mortality. Many do. But it's just a fact of life. If you live long enough, you're going to get old. And no matter how long you live, eventually you're going to die. That's life. That's life. The verses in verses 18 through 21 are a reminder that biologically, both humans and animals live and die, returning to dust. And he says there's no difference. Now, that's taken out of context because, well, there's no difference between us and an animal. Well, there's a big difference. But you got to keep in the context, he's talking about death. He's talking about returning to dust. There's no difference. People die and turn to dust. Animals die and return to dust. It's called mortality. What Solomon states here is the fact of man's vulnerability. The fact of man's lack of control and his absolute dependence upon God. Apart from God, man, even a safe person, will act like an animal or worse. There are things people do that animals don't, for the most part. Living for base fleshly instincts. Failing to prepare for eternity. That animal doesn't think about eternity. So it is with many a people. No thought whatsoever of eternity. Psalm 73. Psalm 73. Notice what the psalmist said here. Verse 22. This is a psalm of Asaph. So foolish was I, and ignorant. I was as a beast before thee. That is, I was like an animal. He realized that he was being governed by foolishness and was acting as if he were untamed, kicking against God. You know, people say things happen. Well, they're acting like a bunch of animals. Yeah, they are. That's true. They don't think right. They're living life with God out of the picture. Psalm 92. Psalm 92. Verse 6. A brutish man, that's an animal-like man, knoweth not, neither doth a fool understand this. You remove God, people act like animals. Psalm 94:8, understand, ye brutish, among the people, and ye fools, when will you be wise? Well, they'll be wise when they view life in the lens of God. Otherwise, they become like animals. And the longer they go down that path, the more animal-like, the more untamed they are. And then man, to solve those problems, they too are animal-like, and they come up with solutions that do not work and never will work. They've removed God from the picture. Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 8. Jeremiah 10, verse 8. But they are altogether brutish and foolish. They're all together that way. This isn't anything new. The stock is a doctrine of vanities. 2 Peter chapter 2. Thought we were going to get through chapter 3. We'll finish it next week. Verse 12. But these has natural brute beast, made to be taken and destroyed, speak evil of the things that they understand not, and shall utterly perish in their own corruption. Folks, the world's not getting better. Only a fool believes that. It's not going to get better either. God has a plan, and everything is working according to plan. Jude verse 10, and we'll close. But these speak evil of those things which they know not, but what they know naturally, as brute beast, in those things they corrupt themselves. The natural knowledge God gives them, because they live apart from God, they even corrupt that natural knowledge. They twist it. But what are we to do? We're to see life as a gift from God. We're to trust God. We're to enjoy the life that God has given us, focused upon Him, realizing why we're here. Fear God. Keep His commandments. We're not here to fix the problems of mankind. Only God can do that. But we're to just trust Him. And when we learn to do that, we find peace. We find peace. There's a rest in knowing that God's in control. God is sovereign. God's in control. A lot of things we don't like. God's in control. And God doesn't govern the world according to our likes or dislikes. It's His business. We need to trust that. Let's look to the Lord. Heavenly Father, we